Today we're doing the substitution station. So if anybody has recently been to the grocery stores and been a little freaked out by some of the empty shelves, never fear, there's plenty of food. I'm going to give you a couple of tips of how you can substitute some different things to make sure you can make the recipes that you want. But my name is Ann Kent. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, which means as a registered dietitian, it's a little bit different than a typical nutritionist or just the term nutritionist in general. Just to give you a little explanation of what some of the letter soup behind my name means. But basically it means that I went to I have a degree from an accredited university. I did 1,200 hours of supervised practice and I completed a national exam to earn the title registered dietitian nutritionist. So if anybody is looking for some nutrition help, I always recommend to look for a dietitian. There are really good nutritionists out there. I do want to point out, I know some really good ones myself. But if you're wondering why I have all those letters, that's why. So anyway, I started Peas and Happiness last year. I went full time with my private practice nutrition, and one of my main goals is to help people use real food to make delicious, healthy meals. I grew up on a farm in central Kansas, and so that's kind of my background. That's where I learned to cook. So my background is not as a chef. I call myself a home cook because I'm not professionally trained at all. My training is in nutrition, not cooking. But I learned to cook in practice. So I grew up cooking with my mom. She is an amazing human who, in addition to helping run the farm and do all of the bills and a lot of the accounting, she also, during my childhood, would cook 2 to 3 times a day. So I learned to cook with her. Something about cooking on the farm, specifically when you live in a rural area, many of you know this, but living on the farm, the closest grocery store to us was like 15 minutes away. So there was no such thing as just running to the store if you ran out of an ingredient. So I got really good at substituting things when I needed to because we had to do that all the time. That was just kind of part of normal life. So I see the empty grocery store shelves and I'm like, ooh, this is a challenge. So I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that excitement to you today. I picked out 4 different things that I've noticed people a little bit stressed about. Specifically, we're going to look at eggs, milk, flour, and then some basic carbohydrates. So potatoes, noodles, those sorts of things. So what do you do if those things are out? The first thing I want to remind everybody is that our food supply is fine. Chickens don't know about coronavirus, so they are still laying eggs. Cows are still producing milk, and my dad is still planting wheat. So there's plenty of food. It's more a matter of what is actually available on the shelves because people are stocking up and buying things in a little bit different pattern than they normally would. So I do want to add one thing to our basic 4 things that we're going to go over today, and that's sour cream because somebody asked. I wanted to point out that you can substitute sour cream with plain yogurt. This is plain Greek yogurt. I love whole milk. I like the extra calories and the flavor, but you can also use non-fat sour cream or plain yogurt as well in place of that. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If there's any questions, you guys know 3 question marks before and after your question in the comments. And Jessica's going to help me out because my wonderful husband is filming, so I can't see the comments. So I'm flying blind and Jessica's helping me out. Okay, so when we talk about substitution, I'm going to give you just a few general substitution tips before we go into the specifics. The main thing to think about when we are trying to substitute in an ingredient is the why behind what you're trying to substitute. That is going to determine how you substitute it. For example, if we're looking at eggs, it's a lot different if I'm trying to substitute an egg in a muffin recipe versus I'm trying to make an omelet. You can't substitute those the same way. So I'm going to break these apart and give you some different examples with both a baking aspect and then like a nutrition aspect, how you can replace those. If anybody has any questions or has any specific recipes that you are trying to use to substitute, please drop a comment below. Jessica will pop in and I'd be happy to go over the specific how to substitute it in that recipe.
There is one.
Oh, awesome. Tell me.
Yeah, Elena has a bunch of frozen tomatillos blended from her garden from last summer, and she has way too much. So she
Blended
wants to know what
tomatoes?
she can do with them.
Tomatoes, you said?
Tomatillos.
Tomatillos. Ooh, I only think of tomatillos as in salsa. I might have to look up some recipes for you, but I think that those would be a really good topping on a lot of different Mexican dishes and Mexican recipes. I think you could probably substitute those in place of tomatoes in a lot of those recipes. It would lend its flavor pretty well. But I'll do a little bit of research on tomatillos and I'll drop a couple of links to some recipes that look good. The only time I've made tomatillos was when a friend planted a ton of pineapple tomatillos and I made salsa out of them. And it was super simple. We just boiled it down, added a little bit of salt, and ate them with chips, and it was phenomenal. So, um, that's my experience, but I'll do some research and let you know. So thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and actually, there was one more thing I wanted to let you know about, just some general substitution tips before we move on. Um, just what I said I was going to do for Elena. Also, I would recommend don't forget that you guys have Google and Hey Siri at your fingertips, and they can answer a lot of your substitution questions. So, even though these are some great general guidelines, and if you have a favorite recipe that you're trying to substitute, if you're wanting a recipe, for example, for let's say for the muffins, but you don't have any milk or eggs, if you search in Google for a vegan version of that, vegan means essentially no eggs or no milk. And so you're going to find some recipes that have specifically been designed for those needs. So that's also a really great resource. The other thing I wanted to remind people, like I said, chickens are still laying eggs, and our local farmers actually have a lot of produce and a lot of meat, eggs, milk. We have some local vendors here in Fort Collins who also do cheese. So I would really encourage you to reach out and see if anybody near you is selling things. They really need the business, and we really need the food. So it's a great time to connect with your local resources. Jessica's going to drop a couple of links in the comments. One specifically for NoCo Virtual Farmers Market. They have a ton of stuff going on right now if you live in the northern Colorado area. Also, I found some local restaurants. One of them is Nordy's. It's a barbecue restaurant. They're actually selling flour and some other staples. So if you're missing things or really can't find them at the grocery store, I would reach out either on Facebook or to your community and see what's going on there. So, okay, we're going to get into eggs. Jessica, if there's any more comments, keep them coming. So with eggs, basically there's two things we're looking at. There is a baking purpose or a nutrition purpose for eggs. So with baking, if you think about what eggs do in your recipes, they provide structure, they help with leavening, meaning that it helps the products rise. And so we need to find something that's both a little bit sticky that can hold things together and also help it rise. So depending on the exact recipe you're looking for, one of these might be better than the other. There's another link that Jessica's going to drop with a review of some different options for what you can use as an egg substitute. I'm going to show you two. I tested both of these the other day when I was making some homemade noodles. One is to use 2 teaspoons of water, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1 teaspoon of oil to replace 1 egg. Eggs have a little bit of fat, and they do help some leavening, and so the baking powder is going to help to leaven the egg. And then the water is just going to give a little bit of substance to your product. That was the most highly rated, actually the second most highly rated option on the website from the kitchen. And it worked really well when I made the noodles with it. The other option is maybe, I'm not sure if everybody has these in their kitchen, but if you have either ground chia seed or ground flaxseed, either of these will work as an option for an egg substitute as well. You mix 1 tablespoon of one of these, so 1 tablespoon of flaxseed with 3 tablespoons of water, mix it together and let it set for at least like 5 minutes. You'll notice that it starts to become gummy, and that's how you know it's gonna help your recipe to hold together. I also made the noodles with those, and that also worked really well. So those are some easy substitutions for baking. Now, in terms of nutrition, obviously you can't mix flaxseed and water together or baking powder and water and make an omelet. So there's another tip, which is to use tofu. Now, I never would have believed that this was a good option until I tested this recipe with my family a couple weeks ago. And we were all shocked at how much the texture tasted, how much the texture and flavor seemed like real scrambled eggs. So basically, you take a block of tofu, you just stir it. You don't drain it like you typically would if you're used to making tofu, but you just use a fork and blend it a little bit till it appears like scrambled eggs. And then we mixed a little bit of turmeric in with it, which made it yellow, some nutritional yeast, or I use Parmesan cheese because I don't have nutritional yeast. And we sauteed it like we usually would scrambled eggs. So I'm going to have some recipes available to you. One of those is the tofu scramble that I just mentioned. So we'll drop a link for the recipe packet at the end of this video, and you can definitely get some of these recipes if you're interested. So any other questions about eggs before I move on to milk? Okay. So milk, there are a ton of milk substitutes, and many people are already dairy-free or lactose intolerant or for whatever reason not using milk. So there's definitely a ton of options that you can use generally. Like this is almond milk. It's unsweetened. I definitely recommend to use unsweetened because if you're using sweetened, then of course it tastes sweeter and nicer if you're just drinking it. But if you're baking with it, it might lend a strange flavor. So there's a lot of difference in the different types of milk substitutes between soy, almond, oat milk. There's a ton of new ones out there. There's a lot of difference in the nutritional quality as well as the fat content. And so it's not always going to act exactly the same, but it is a fine option. Also, along with what we were saying about the local farms, we have a milkman deliver this delicious milk from a local dairy. So that might also be something to look into if you're looking to both support a local farm and also get some real milk on a consistent basis. I would consider looking into one of those options. Otherwise,
Hi, there is a question from Wendy.
great, yes.
She wants to know, can you substitute regular milk for buttermilk?
Buttermilk is I'm not sure which way. So buttermilk is a little bit different than regular milk. If a recipe calls for buttermilk, it's a little bit acidic. And so if you're using regular milk, you need to add a little bit of acid to it. I usually add about a half of a teaspoon. I always have to look this up. A half of a teaspoon of white vinegar per cup of milk. It's either a half teaspoon or a teaspoon. I will put that conversion down. So I never, ever, ever keep buttermilk on hand because I don't use it enough to go through it without it going bad. But I have my favorite pancake recipe calls for buttermilk. So I always just substitute milk and white vinegar, and that curdles it just a little bit. And it helps it to rise is essentially what's happening. If you use regular milk instead of buttermilk, it won't rise as well because you don't have the interaction between the acid and the base. There's some neato food, nutrition, cooking tips for you, science. Yeah, great question. Let me know if I didn't answer that or if you have more questions. So if you do not have milk or you don't have one of these milk substitutes, there are some other ways that you can substitute things in place of milk. Jessica's also going to drop a link with a blog post, not my blog post, but another dietitian who have some different tips. So first of all, there is such thing as non-fat instant dry milk. It's not super delicious, but it's very handy. This works really well if you're baking. You're not really going to notice a ton of flavor difference. It also lasts forever. I think I had this for when we were like camping a couple of years ago. I don't know. It's been a while. So thankfully it lasts a really long time because it's dry. But that's super handy. I have heard that this is running low in the grocery stores. So if you're not going to use that, you can also substitute water and butter. So for a cup of water, you would need 1.5 teaspoons of butter. So a tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So you would essentially need half a teaspoon of butter plus 1 cup of water to equal a cup of milk. And that's because in milk is made of water, fat, carbs, and protein. And so this helps to substitute a little bit of the fat that would normally be in milk. Okay, the other option, if you want to go dairy free, and what we've been doing a lot, especially as I've been creating some more vegan recipes, is to use a milk substitute like coconut milk. This is going to work a lot better than like the almond milk that I was just showing you because it's higher in fat, and so it's going to act a little bit more like milk. I have a really delicious recipe for winter tomato basil bisque that's also in the recipe packet, and that uses coconut milk. You can use regular milk in that recipe if you'd like to, but we actually liked it better when we used the coconut milk. It had just a richer, kind of nuttier flavor. It's almost a little bit sweet. We didn't need to add sugar to the recipe when we added the coconut milk. It was already sweet enough. The last option, I don't actually have this in my cabinet, but is to use half evaporated milk and half water. So evaporated milk is canned. You'll find it in the baking section, and that's another way to substitute for regular milk. Now, again, these are all baking purposes. If we're talking about nutrition, none of the milk is actually going to be the same, but some of the milk substitutes like butter and water obviously is not the same nutritionally as milk. So the main thing that dairy has that is calcium. And so there are tons of other ways that you can get calcium, like fortified almond milk or other forms of alternatives. But you can also use things like canned salmon or canned tuna. If it has bones in it, the bones actually obviously have calcium. They are soft enough that you can squish them in your fingers and you can mix them in if you're making like salmon burgers. You won't even notice they're there. It's kind of weird, I know, if you've never done that, but I've done it several times. I've made it for guests. Nobody knows there's bones in it and everybody got extra calcium. It was a win-win. The other thing, there's lots of veggies that have tons of calcium. Some are kale. Leafy greens are great. Broccoli is another one. If nobody's ever used kale before, just FYI, it's in season right now. So again, lots of local vendors are going to have kale, especially if they have greenhouses. It's going to already be ready. If you have a fresh kale stem, hold it by the base and strip the leaves off and then throw away the stem. This is inedible. There's tons of fiber in kale. This part you cannot eat. So put that in your compost, and the rest you can either tear, you can chop. You want to either massage the leaves or saute them because kale it's pretty hardy vegetable. So it's going to need a little work. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty tough. Okay, but it's full of calcium. Yay. So if you don't have milk, try that. Okay, we're going to talk about flour now. Jessica, I'll check in if there's any other questions. No? Okay. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about what flour is used for. Typically, we're thinking of baking, right? So it's either used, wheat flour basically has two components. It has the starch and it has the gluten. So if you think about the starch, its job is to thicken things. So if you have a gravy or sauce, or if you're trying to replace something like condensed milk, or I'm sorry, not condensed milk, condensed soup, if you have like a casserole, you can use something like cornstarch in place of that. So cornstarch is just the starch from corn instead of the starch from wheat flour. And the important thing with cornstarch is, unlike flour, if you're making a gravy, normal flour gravy, you start with a roux, which is basically butter and flour. You melt the butter in the pan, add in the flour, mix it together, and then you add your milk or water, whatever you're using for your gravy. Cornstarch is a little bit of the opposite. You actually want to add it at the end if you're making a gravy or a sauce because it doesn't hold up to heat as well. So if you overheat it, it'll break down and then you'll lose its thickening power. And that's a bummer because that's what you're trying to do. So you make your gravy, you have your delicious sauce, whatever, already made, and then you take a little bit of cornstarch and mix it with a little bit of water outside of your pan, mix it with that, and then once it's very well mixed, then stir in the cornstarch slurry, is what it's called, into the sauce, stirring continuously as you add it. That'll prevent any clumping and make sure you have a really nice even sauce. And the nice thing about cornstarch is that it doesn't have very much flavor. So it's really good in things like sweet and sour sauce, or like a sauce that you don't want a heavy flour taste. Cornstarch is a really good alternative. Other things, so the other side of this is baking, right? So and the gluten. Gluten is a magical component. Anybody who's tried doing gluten-free baking knows how magical gluten is. It basically is it's sort of like a a balloon that it's stretchy. It's like the outer part of the balloon. So when whatever chemical action occurs, whether it's like baking powder or if it's yeast, when the bread or the pastry rises, the gluten allows it to expand and it creates those air pockets, which makes things nice and light and fluffy. So if you're trying to make something without gluten, it can be kind of tough. There's some different options. Obviously, if you have things like, if you're using flour as like a filler, you could use something like breadcrumbs that still obviously has flour and gluten in it. You can also use something like, there's a ton of different kinds of flours out there made of different things other than wheat. For example, these are some oats. If you really are in a bind and need just a quick filler in place of flour, you can make your oats into oat flour just by pulsing them in a coffee grinder for a few minutes. So let me just do that real fast. Don't over pulse, otherwise it'll become mush. But when you pulse it just a little bit, now you can see that that's kind of a flour. So that's a really good way if you're like needing a filler for, say you're making meatloaf for some hamburger patties or something like that, that calls for breadcrumbs or flour and you don't have those. Otherwise, I would just recommend if you're needing some baked goods and you just want to make something sweet, just make something without flour. So things like no-bake cookies or Rice Krispie treats. I actually have a recipe for peanut butter cookies that are flourless. It's literally just peanut butter, sugar, egg. I threw in some flaxseed to make it healthier. So that recipe is also going to be in the recipe packet. So that is flour. Any other questions about that? No. Okay, we're going to go on to pasta and potatoes. That's the other thing that I noticed at the store. I saw more potatoes at the store when I went there yesterday, but the pasta section was still kind of wiped out. So again, if we go back to the purpose and of why we want these, it's basically a carbohydrate in our meal. It's a main part of our meal. So instead of those, these are basically interchangeable with things like other carbohydrates, like quinoa would be a good option. Other types of rice. So I have jasmine rice here. Brown rice would be another option. I know that the rice was also limited. So I didn't check the quinoa because I had a ton of it. So I don't know if it's there. Quinoa is super easy to make, guys. It takes like 15 minutes start to finish. So I love making quinoa if I'm short on time. Rice, especially whole grain rice, brown rice, takes forever to cook. So this is a super good option instead, and it's really healthy. Another really great carbohydrate, anybody who knows me knows how much I love lentils. Lentils are a legume. They're a cousin of black beans or pinto beans, those sorts of beans, but they cook in about 45 to 60 minutes. So they're a lot faster cook time, but they're another really good, healthy carbohydrate that you could use in place of some of your other carbs. Okay, but if you're really needing a potato and are stuck on that, I would recommend to try butternut squash. Butternut squash has been, there's been a ton of butternut squash every time I've been to the grocery store. I don't think they're very popular because we don't see them very much. But they sort of taste like a sweet potato if you've never had them before. And how you prepare it, you use a peeler, a vegetable peeler, peel the outside, and then I chop off the top and bottom. I cut them in half right here, and then I cut them in slices and then cube them. The bell, you'll have some seeds in there. And so when you cut it in half lengthwise, you'll need to scoop out the seeds and you can either discard those, or I have a delicious recipe for roasted squash seeds. That's really good. My 11-year-old always makes me save them and make them for him because he loves them so much. So that's kind of a fun treat. But you can just cube that and use that in place of potatoes. I have a recipe for sweet and spicy farmer's hash using butternut squash. The original recipe, I used potatoes, but then was trying to cut out a few of the carbs and so used butternut squash instead, and everybody liked it better. So I would really recommend to check that out. Again, I'll have that link where you can sign up and get that recipe packet to try it out. Okay, the other thing, if you're looking for pasta and there is none, I have two options for you. For an Italian style dish, I would recommend to try spaghetti squash. This is a magical squash that already is in spaghetti noodles inside. You just don't know it yet. So you just have to release him. To cook him, stab him first with a fork so that he doesn't explode. And you can either boil him, roast him, or what's the other way? Or you can microwave them actually, which is kind of crazy. It takes like 20, 30 minutes in the microwave. It depends how big it is. This is a really small spaghetti squash, so probably less time. Just keep checking him, and as soon as you can insert a fork and it's really soft, that means he's done. So once the spaghetti squash is cooked, cut it in half lengthwise. There's seeds inside again, so you can scoop those out and discard them or save them and roast them. And then you literally just take a fork and pull out the strands of spaghetti squash, and it's amazing. So it doesn't taste exactly like pasta, but if you're looking for something with an Italian flavor, putting in Italian sausage and marinara, it's going to be really delicious. The other option is another of the recipes that I'm going to give you in that recipe packet. It's for homemade egg noodles. And those noodles have a special place in my heart because I learned to make them when I was a little girl. I would sit on my grandma's countertop and help her roll out the dough. They are so forgiving. It doesn't matter if you roll them thick or thin. It doesn't matter if you cut them in weird angles and they're all misshapen. They all cook up and they are such delicious homemade noodles. So I highly recommend you grab that recipe packet so that you can try them out. It's really fun. It's a really fun activity to get kids involved with. We had a party for, I guess my stepson was 9 at the time, and his buddies came over and they were enthralled with the fact that we were making our own homemade noodles. It was just a really fun activity and everybody got to participate. So if you want to relive my childhood, go sign up for the recipe packet and it'll be really fun. So yes, in that recipe packet, you're going to get 5 things. So for the egg substitute, you'll get the tofu scramble. For the milk, you'll get the winter tomato basil bisque. For the flour, you'll get the peanut butter cookies, which are flourless. Instead of potatoes, you'll get the sweet and spicy farmer's hash, which is delicious. It does have eggs, but you could leave those off if you didn't have them. And then the 5th one is those homemade noodles. It's actually a chicken. It's a homemade chicken noodle soup recipe. So, does anybody have questions? How are we doing? Good. The other thing I just wanted to let you guys know, since everybody's trying to minimize their trips to the grocery store, I wanted to let everybody know I'm giving away a free month of Peas and Hoppy meal guides. So if anybody is like struggling to figure out their rhythm with cooking, this might be a really good thing to help you out. Every week you get 4 cooked recipes, and you also get some grab and go meals, some breakfast ideas and snack ideas, just to switch things up, keep things healthy but interesting so you don't get bored with what you're doing. But the best thing is that you get a grocery list. So you can take that to the store, get everything you need at once, add the other staples that your family eats all the time. And that way you won't have to worry about going back and forth all the time. So those are all the substitutions I have for you, unless you guys have other questions. Otherwise, Jessica can help me tell you about some of the other things that we have coming up really soon. No?
So there are no questions right now. All of the links are inside the comments. So check out the comment section for everything that Ann was talking about. And there's also what you get with each link. So
Cool.
Perfect.
Yeah. So the next Saturday is another event, and that one is the Quarantine Cooking Challenge. And this is where I want you guys to challenge me. I have dug through my pantry and found some super random items. I will show you what they are. You guys get to vote on which ones you want to see me cook. I might dig through and find some others, but here are a couple options. Wendy, if you're on, you might recognize these. I haven't figured out what to do with these amazing German lentils yet. Beluga Linsen. Linsen means lentils, I figured out, but I don't know what beluga is. It's a type of lentil. So,
and a whale.
Right. So I know beluga whales, but I don't know beluga lentils. So I could get to know those. I also have these beets that a friend gave me that apparently got lost in the back of the cabinet that I would really like to use. So we have some beets. And then I have these weird marinated mushrooms, which sound good, I guess. I mean, I like olives, so I assume I would like marinated mushrooms. I don't know what to do with them, though. So those are a couple of the things that if you would like to participate, please, I'll put up a poll and you guys can vote on which ingredients you would like to see me use in the same meal. And I will make something that tastes good, I think. So we'll see how it goes. If anybody in the Northern Colorado area has a random ingredient that you would like me to use, I guess you can like drop that off on my porch or something, and then I will try to figure out how to use that. So, but I'm going to try not to go to the store again. So we'll see.
You're going to use the
Anyway,
most random things on your porch.
yeah, yeah, that could be. So I might, instead of using up the weird ingredients, I might have more weird ingredients in my pantry. This might be a bad idea. I don't know. We'll see.
Wendy says definitely the lentils from Berlin.
Okay. Lentils from Berlin are in. Good. All right. Yeah. Well, tomorrow night, Jessica is going to lead us in. You want to tell them about tomorrow night, actually, since you're doing that, Jessica?
Yeah, sure. So tomorrow night is Sunday night. On Sundays, we're going to do a gratitude theme because gratitude is super good for raising your vibration and how you feel, and it helps with mental wellness, mental health, emotional wellness, like all of these things. So it's a great practice, and I will be leading a guided meditation with some movement.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot to be grateful for. It's a really challenging time, but yeah, it's also important to know what we're thankful for. So hopefully that'll be really helpful for you guys. Um, I think that's all I've got. So um, yeah, if you have any other substitution questions or if you want to chat about nutrition, I love talking about food in all aspects. So feel free to drop a comment, send me a message. Um, and yeah, make sure you sign up for that recipe packet so you can get some of these goodies. I'm excited to share them with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Anne. And everyone else have a wonderful day, evening, whenever you're watching.
Sounds great. All right.
Bye.
Bye.